My father called me uneducated trash and screamed, "Get out, you lowlife." The next morning, my name is not important. What matters is what I was carrying when I walked out that door. I was 32 years old, and I had spent exactly 11 years trying to prove that I was not what my father said I was. He said it at my brother's engagement party. He said it at Christmas dinner when I showed up alone. He said it in voicemails I saved and never deleted. But the night he screamed it across the dining room with silver forks frozen mid-air and my mother staring at her plate like she had suddenly become illiterate, something in me finally stopped fighting. "Get out, you lowlife." Those words did not break me. They did something worse. They made me calm. I had been carrying a leather bag that night, old and scuffed. The kind you buy from a street vendor because you cannot afford real leather. My brother Ethan looked at that bag and smirked. He thought it held my laptop and maybe some half-finished freelance sketches I was too embarrassed to show anyone. He had no idea it contained the final term sheet for a rescue package worth $14 million. He had no idea I had spent 6 months quietly buying up debt, auditing their accounts, and preparing to save the very company he was bleeding dry. None of them knew that the woman they called worthless had sold her first tech company for $19 million 3 years earlier. None of them knew I had started that company in a room above a laundromat with a broken heater and a second-hand laptop. None of them knew that I had spent every night for 7 years coding and crying and eating vending machine food because I refused to ask my father for help again. The last time I asked, he laughed and told me I should get married instead. I looked at my mother across the table. She lowered her eyes like she always did. I looked at my brother, whose smile said everything his mouth would not. Then I looked at my father, Victor Sterling, the man who had built a regional furniture empire and spent 30 years convincing everyone that a son with a business degree was worth more than a daughter who left college because she had a better idea. I closed the clasp on the bag. I met my brother's grin and smiled. Not an angry smile, not a sad smile. A cold, quiet smile that I had practiced in the mirror after every humiliating phone call for a decade. I said one word, "Fine." I walked out without begging, without crying, without explaining. Behind me, my father announced that I would come crawling back once real life taught me a lesson. He was so confident. He was always confident. That was his greatest weakness and his most dangerous weapon. He believed confidence was the same as truth. The next morning, everything changed. His board received one email at 6:42 in the morning. His bank froze a $7 million credit line at 7:03. My brother discovered that the numbers he had buried in quarterly reports were no longer buried. By 8:15, the independent directors had called an emergency meeting. By 9 o'clock, the company could not pay its vendors. I did not sleep that night. I stayed in a budget hotel 3 blocks from their headquarters because I wanted to watch the sun rise over the building where my father's name was carved into the lobby wall. I had dreamed of that moment. I had imagined myself walking in, slapping documents on the table, watching their faces drain of color. But when morning came, I felt something I did not expect. I felt tired. Not tired like I needed sleep. Tired like I had been carrying something heavy for so long that I forgot what it felt like to be light. Celeste called me at 5 in the morning. She had been my partner since the laundromat days. She knew everything. She knew about the voice memos I recorded after every cruel phone call. She knew about the folder I kept on my desktop called Emergency, which was really just a collection of screenshots and recordings and emails that I used to remind myself that I was not crazy. She answered the phone on the first ring and said, "Do you still believe they can be trusted with your money and those employees' futures?" I looked at the hotel window. I could see their building in the distance. I thought about Maria, the warehouse supervisor I had met during due diligence. She had worked there for 18 years. Her daughter had a chronic condition. She did not know that I knew her name. She did not know that I had seen her file and her medical bills and her termination risk if the company collapsed. "No," I said, "I do not trust them." At 10:17 that night, I instructed our attorneys to withdraw the unsigned rescue offer. I also authorized them to deliver every material discrepancy uncovered during due diligence to the independent directors and the lending bank. I did not manufacture that evidence. I did not exaggerate it. I simply stopped protecting them from it. Before sleeping, I played one of my old voice memos. In it, my younger self was crying after Victor had called my first client a pity contract. I listened until the recording ended. Then I deleted it. I was no longer collecting proof that they had hurt me. By morning, they would be collecting proof of what Ethan had done. At 6:42 the next morning, my phone began vibrating across the hotel nightstand. The first call came from my mother. The second came from a number I recognized as the main office. The third came from Ethan, followed by 6 messages that moved from confusion to accusation in less than 4 minutes. "Did you do something?" he wrote. "Call me now. Then, you have no idea what you are interfering with. Finally, Dad says this is your fault." I showered. I dressed in a navy suit that cost more than my first car. I let every call go unanswered. At 8 o'clock, Astor Lane's counsel sent formal notice that we were withdrawing our proposed investment because material representations made during due diligence could not be verified. At 8:12, the bank suspended Sterling Heritage's revolving credit facility pending review. At 8:30, the independent directors called an emergency meeting. At 9, the company could no longer pay several vendors without board approval. Celeste met me outside the headquarters with our attorney, Priya Shah, and 2 forensic accountants. The building had always intimidated me when I was younger. My father's name was carved into a stone wall in the lobby. A portrait of him hung above the reception desk. That morning I noticed the people beneath the portrait. Employees whispering over their phones. Assistants carrying folders between offices. A receptionist trying not to cry. Their fear reminded me why I could not treat this like a private family argument. If I acted recklessly, people who had never insulted me would pay the highest price. The boardroom fell silent when I entered. Victor sat at one end of the table, his face rigid with outrage. Ethan stood behind him with both hands planted on a chair. My mother was not a director, but she had come anyway and remained near the wall. None of them had expected me. They expected a representative from Astor Lane. Victor's eyes narrowed. "This is a board meeting." "I know," I said. "I am the managing member of Astor Lane Capital." For 1 second, no one moved. Ethan laughed, but it came out too loudly and died too quickly. Victor looked toward Priya, as if waiting for her to correct me. She placed the ownership documents on the table and confirmed my authority. Then she distributed a second packet. Lattice North's acquisition announcement, my retained equity disclosures, the audited statement showing the $19 million from my sale. My father did not look impressed. He looked betrayed, which was almost unbelievable. "You hid this from us." "You never asked what I built," I replied. "You only asked when I planned to become respectable." Ethan grabbed the due diligence report and flipped through it. His confidence weakened as he reached the highlighted pages. Our accountants had found revenue recorded before products shipped. Marketing expenses routed through a consulting company he secretly owned. Nearly $900,000 in personal travel, club memberships, and renovations labeled as expansion costs. Worse, he had sent altered reports to the bank while certifying that the figures were accurate. He threw the packet down. "These are accounting differences." One of the independent directors, a retired judge named Helen Cross, corrected him. "No," she said, "these may be fraud." Victor turned on me. "You came into my company pretending to help. You collected private information. Then you attacked us because of one argument." I had expected anger, but his choice of words clarified everything. He still believed the insult was the problem, not the conduct it revealed. Not the fraud his son had committed, not the employees who would lose their jobs because of his favoritism. "The review began 6 months before last night," I said. "Your executives supplied these records voluntarily. I was prepared to invest despite the losses because the underlying business can survive." I was not prepared to invest after the chief operating officer falsified information and the chief executive defended him. I defended my son, Victor snapped. And sacrificed everyone who works here, I replied. That landed harder than shouting would have. Several directors looked away from him. Ethan began insisting that Victor had approved the aggressive accounting. Victor denied it. Their alliance cracked in front of us. Each man suddenly more interested in surviving than protecting the other. The board voted to place Ethan on immediate administrative leave and authorize a forensic audit. Victor retained his title temporarily, but lost unilateral control over finances. The bank demanded additional collateral and warned that any further misrepresentation would trigger default. Astor Lane would not restore the rescue offer, but I proposed limited emergency financing for payroll under direct board supervision. The money could not be used for executive bonuses, legal defense, or payments to related vendors. I would protect the employees without protecting the people who created the crisis. Victor refused before the motion was even discussed. I will not let my daughter seize my company. Helen answered him. Then your company may not exist in 30 days. The emergency payroll facility passed without his support. As we left, Ethan followed me into the hallway. The smirk from the night before was gone. You planned this, he said. No, I told him. I planned to save you. You planned the part that destroyed you. He reached for my arm, but Priya stepped between us. Employees were watching through glass office walls. Ethan lowered his hand and leaned close enough for only me to hear. I will make sure everyone knows what kind of person you are. I believed him. Shame had never made my brother honest. It had only made him dangerous. When the elevator doors closed, my phone displayed a notification from an industry blog. An anonymous source was already claiming that a vindictive former student had targeted Sterling Heritage after being rejected by her family. The next battle had begun before we reached the lobby. By noon, the anonymous article had been copied across 3 business forums. It described me as an unstable college dropout who had used family connections to obtain confidential records. It claimed Astor Lane existed only to conduct a hostile takeover. It suggested the Lattice North sale had been exaggerated. The article never mentioned Ethan's altered bank reports. It did not mention the rescue package I had prepared or the payroll facility I had offered. It turned a documented corporate crisis into a story about a bitter daughter seeking attention. Celeste traced the first tip to a public relations consultant who had recently received payment from one of Ethan's hidden vendors. Priya advised me not to respond immediately. Facts are strongest when they arrive in the right order, she said. Let them commit to the lie before we show the evidence. Waiting felt unbearable. I had spent years being silent while my family defined me. Now silence looked like surrender. That afternoon, I was scheduled to lead Lattice North's final presentation to Meridian Global, the largest potential client in our history. Their executives had flown in to decide whether to license our technology across 22 countries. If the online accusations frightened them, the contract could disappear, and dozens of jobs I had created would be affected. 10 minutes before the meeting, Victor called from a private number. I answered because I wanted to know how far he would go. Withdraw the audit request, he said. There was no greeting. Restore the original funding. Release a statement that this was a misunderstanding. I will tell Ethan to stop speaking to reporters. You are admitting he is behind it. I am telling you how families settle things. No, I said. You are telling me how you trained everyone to protect him. His voice hardened. Do not confuse money with education. You got lucky once. People like you lose everything when serious professionals start asking questions. The sentence was almost identical to one he had left on my voicemail years earlier after Lattice North lost its first major pitch. For a moment, I was back above the laundromat, sitting on the floor because I did not own a chair, wondering whether he was right. My hand began to shake. Then I looked through the conference room glass at my team. Celeste was checking the demonstration. Engineers who had worked beside me for years were taking their seats. They did not believe in me because of a diploma, a family name, or a lucky transaction. They believed in results they had helped produce. "I am done negotiating against your contempt," I told Victor. "Speak through counsel." I ended the call, saved the recording, and walked into the presentation. Meridian's chief strategy officer asked about the article before I reached the second slide. Every face turned toward me. The old version of me would have over-explained, apologized for the distraction, and tried to prove that I was not angry. Instead, I gave them a concise answer. I acknowledged my relationship to Sterling Heritage. I disclosed Astor Lane's role. I explained that an independent audit was underway. I offered Meridian's lawyers access to any records relevant to Lattice North's ownership or finances. Then I returned to the product. For 2 hours, my team demonstrated how our model had improved campaign performance without exploiting private consumer data. I answered technical questions. I challenged an unrealistic deployment timeline. I admitted one limitation instead of hiding it. Transparency did what defensiveness never could. Meridian signed a letter of intent worth $14 million over 3 years, contingent on routine compliance review. That evening, Lattice North issued a public statement supported by audited financial records. We confirmed the $19 million transaction without revealing unnecessary personal details. Astor Lane separately released the dates of the Sterling Heritage Review, proving it had begun long before the birthday dinner. The independent directors announced Ethan's suspension and the discovery of material irregularities. We did not call him a criminal. We did not need to. The documents spoke clearly. The reaction reversed within hours. Reporters who had repeated the first story began asking who had supplied it. Former Sterling employees contacted the audit team with information about fake vendors and retaliatory practices. One store manager provided emails showing that Ethan had ordered staff to delay recording customer returns until the following quarter. A former assistant described how Victor dismissed her concerns because questioning Ethan was disloyal. My mother called late that night. She sounded exhausted. She said Victor had barely slept and Ethan was blaming everyone. Then she asked whether I could lower the temperature before the company's annual shareholder meeting. "Did you ask them to stop when they called me trash?" I asked. She was quiet. "That silence is the answer," I said. "You are not powerless, Mom. You chose the side that required the least courage." She began to cry. But I did not rush to comfort her. Compassion did not require me to erase accountability. I told her she could still tell the truth to the auditors. Whether she did so would determine what relationship, if any, we had afterward. Before bed, I opened another old voice memo. In it, I was 24 and promising myself that success would make Victor apologize. I deleted that recording too. Success had not changed him. Consequences might. The annual shareholder meeting took place 9 days later in a downtown hotel ballroom. Under normal circumstances, it was a ceremonial event where Victor delivered polished remarks, Ethan displayed optimistic charts, and longtime investors approved whatever management recommended. This year, security checked every badge twice. Reporters waited outside. Employees filled the back rows because rumors of store closures had spread faster than the board could answer them. I attended as Astor Lane's managing member and temporary payroll lender. I wore the same navy suit I had worn to the emergency meeting. The leather bag was with me again, but this time nobody mistook it for the baggage of a failed daughter. Victor opened the meeting by blaming temporary market pressure and outside interference. He spoke for 15 minutes without naming Ethan's suspension or the frozen credit line. Then, against his lawyer's advice, he pointed toward me. "My daughter has chosen to exploit a family disagreement for financial gain," he announced. "She has no degree, no experience running a company like ours, and no understanding of what generations of disciplined leadership require." A murmur moved through the room. Celeste glanced at me, but I remained seated. Victor thought he was restoring the old hierarchy. Father above daughter, graduate above dropout, founder above outsider. He did not understand that authority disappears when the evidence stops supporting it. Helen Cross interrupted. As lead independent director, I formally moved to replace Victor as chair for the remainder of the meeting. The motion passed by a clear majority. His microphone was muted. For the first time in his professional life, my father had to sit down because other people decided he no longer controlled the room. Helen invited the forensic accountants to present their preliminary findings. The numbers were worse than our original review suggested. Ethan's consulting company had received $1.7 million through layered vendor payments. He had used corporate funds for a luxury apartment, private travel, and renovations to a property registered in his name. He had also created side letters promising discounts to distributors, then excluded those obligations from internal forecasts. The inflated figures helped trigger performance bonuses for both him and Victor. Ethan stood and shouted that the payments had been approved. Victor shouted back that his signature had been placed on documents he had not fully reviewed. Watching them accuse each other was not joyful. It was colder than joy. It was the end of a lie that had been maintained at everyone else's expense. The accountants then displayed an email Victor had sent after the finance director raised concerns. Ethan understands the future of this company, it read. Stop creating obstacles and adjust to the report. Victor might not have designed the scheme, but he had protected it. His favoritism was no longer merely cruel parenting. It was failed governance with a dollar amount attached. Helen announced 3 recommendations. Terminate Ethan for cause, refer the evidence to federal and state authorities, remove Victor as chief executive pending a shareholder vote. She also recommended pursuing restitution and clawing back improperly awarded bonuses. Victor asked for the microphone again. This time his voice had lost its theatrical confidence. He looked directly at me. Abigail, tell them you will fund the company. Tell them this can be resolved. The room became so quiet that I heard a camera shutter near the door. This was the moment I had imagined in different forms for years. In my angriest fantasies, I humiliated him exactly as he had humiliated me. In my kinder fantasies, he apologized and I saved him. Neither fantasy fit the truth. I offered funding, I said, standing. It required an independent audit and accountable management. You rejected those terms because accepting them meant admitting I had built something valuable and Ethan had damaged what you gave him. I will not use $19 million to purchase the respect you should have given me for free. Ethan pushed past a security officer and faced me. You think selling some software makes you better than us? No, I think telling the truth makes me safer to trust. He accused me of setting him up, stealing his company and turning Victor against him. I opened the bag and removed the original rescue term sheet. My signature was already on it. The date showed that I had approved the investment hours before the birthday dinner. I placed it on the document camera so everyone could see the conditions and the amount. I came to that dinner prepared to save this company, I said. You sent me out carrying the proof. The effect was immediate. Employees in the back rows began whispering. Several shareholders who had viewed me as an opportunist now understood that Victor's own conduct had cost them a viable rescue. A reporter asked whether my withdrawal had been personal retaliation. The unsigned offer was discretionary, I answered. The disclosure of suspected fraud was a legal and ethical obligation. I will not apologize for either decision. Voting resumed. Ethan was terminated unanimously. Victor was removed as chief executive by 81% of voting shares. His bonus for the previous 2 years was frozen pending recovery proceedings. The board appointed an interim leader and authorized negotiations with Astor Lane for the purchase of healthy divisions if the company could not restructure. As security escorted Ethan from the ballroom, he looked toward Victor, expecting one final rescue. Victor stared at the table. The loyalty that had protected my brother for years vanished when it became expensive. My mother found me in the corridor afterward. She had given the auditors copies of household financial records, showing that Victor had moved company reimbursements into personal accounts. Her decision had come late, but it was not meaningless. "I should have spoken years ago," she said. "Yes," I replied. "You should have." She asked whether that meant I hated her. I told her hate was not the issue. Trust was. Trust would require time, honesty, and actions that did not depend on whether Victor approved. Behind us, the ballroom doors opened and employees poured into the hall. Some were relieved, others were terrified about their jobs. Their faces pulled me away from the private satisfaction of the vote. Victor and Ethan had lost their titles. The innocent people still needed a future. My revenge would mean nothing if it merely transferred pain downward. Sterling Heritage entered court-supervised restructuring the following week. Its lenders moved to seize collateral, including the lake house Victor had used to guarantee expansion debt. The board sued Ethan for restitution, and investigators issued subpoenas for his vendor accounts. Several luxury purchases were frozen before he could sell them. The business magazines that once praised him as a young visionary now printed timelines of his hidden transactions. Friends who had enjoyed corporate trips stopped returning his calls. Victor experienced a different kind of collapse. His photograph came down from the headquarters lobby. Industry groups removed him from speaking events. The board demanded repayment of bonuses tied to false results, and his personal attorneys warned that defending Ethan could expose him further. He had spent decades teaching me that reputation was earned through titles. In 10 days, he learned how quickly a title vanished when nobody trusted the person beneath it. Astor Lane offered to acquire 3 profitable divisions, assume selected obligations, and preserve 412 jobs. Our proposal excluded Victor and Ethan from management, canceled related party contracts, and created an employee advisory council. We also established a hardship fund for workers affected by store closures. I was not rescuing my family's legacy. I was rescuing what their employees had built to spite them. Victor requested a private meeting at his attorney's office. When I arrived, he looked smaller without the company behind him. There was no carved name, no portrait, no long table separating us. He asked me to alter the acquisition terms so he could remain as a consultant and keep the lake house. "No," I said. His face tightened. "You would take everything from your own father. I did not sign the guarantees. I did not approve false reports. I did not reject the rescue package. I am refusing to make everyone else pay for your choices." He shifted tactics and said the family would be publicly disgraced. I reminded him that employees had already lost savings, vendors had gone unpaid, and managers had been pressured to lie. His embarrassment was not the greatest harm in the room. Then he said something I had never heard from him. "I need your help." The words mattered, but they were not an apology. I told him I would support a settlement that protected my mother's independent retirement account, provided it had not received company funds. I would not protect his house, title, bonuses, or control. Before Astor Lane closed the acquisition, he would issue a truthful public statement acknowledging that he had ignored warnings, favored Ethan over qualified employees, misrepresented me, and rejected legitimate oversight. He also had to cooperate fully with investigators. He stared at me for a long time. "You want me to humiliate myself? I want you to stop making other people carry your shame." He signed 3 days later. Ethan refused every opportunity to cooperate. He posted angry videos claiming that I had bought witnesses and manipulated the audit. Each new accusation gave investigators another statement to compare with the records. His fiancée ended their engagement after learning that her name appeared on a credit card paid by a fake vendor. His private club revoked his membership. Eventually, facing overwhelming documentation, he entered negotiations through a criminal defense attorney. Mary Ann moved out of the family home before it was sold. She began therapy and provided a complete statement to the board. I helped her find an apartment, but I did not invite her into my daily life. Assistance was not the same as restored intimacy. The acquisition closed 6 weeks after the birthday dinner. At the employee meeting, I did not tell the story as a daughter defeating her father. I explained the new structure, the preserved jobs, the ethics hotline, and the profit-sharing plan. When the applause came, I thought of the laundromat room and the voice memos I had used to survive. I had wanted my family to witness my success. Instead, hundreds of workers witnessed what I chose to do with it. That difference mattered more. 1 year later, the 3 divisions we acquired were profitable again. We renamed the combined company Northline House, not after me, not after Victor. The new name belonged to the people moving forward. Customer complaints fell. Employee retention rose. The first profit-sharing payments went to warehouse crews, drivers, designers, and store teams who had endured the collapse without causing it. Lattice North's agreement with Meridian also expanded, making the $19 million sale look less like the peak of my life and more like the beginning of what disciplined work could create. Ethan pleaded guilty to 1 count involving fraudulent bank statements and agreed to repay a substantial portion of the diverted money. He received a prison sentence followed by supervised release, and the court barred him from serving as an officer of a public company during that period. The sentence did not erase what he had done, but it ended the family tradition of calling consequences cruelty. For once, his last name could not negotiate reality away. Victor sold the family house and lake property to satisfy guarantees and settlement obligations. He moved into a modest condominium and lost the social circle that had gathered around his authority. His public statement remained online. It included the words he had resisted most. I dismissed my daughter's work because it challenged my beliefs about status and education. I protected my son when I should have protected the company and its employees. I did not write those sentences for him. I rejected the first 3 drafts until his words became specific enough to be honest. He sent me a letter after Ethan's sentencing. There were no excuses in it. He admitted that calling me uneducated trash had not been a momentary loss of temper. It had been the clearest expression of a hierarchy he had enforced for years. He said he understood that an apology did not create access to my life. I read the letter twice and placed it in a drawer. I did not rush to forgive him, and I did not burn it. Some wounds do not require permanent hatred, but they do require permanent memory. Months later, I agreed to meet him in a public cafe for 30 minutes. He did not ask for money or a position. He asked about my work and listened to the entire answer. That was the first honest conversation we had ever had. It was not reconciliation. It was evidence that change might be possible if he continued without reward. My relationship with Mary Ann moved slowly. She kept attending therapy, volunteered with the Employee Hardship Fund, and stopped asking me to make peace for the family's comfort. Celeste remained the person who could challenge me without diminishing me. When Northline House opened a training program for employees without college degrees, I named the scholarship after no one. Education mattered deeply to me, but I had learned that education was larger than a credential. It included skill, curiosity, accountability, and the courage to correct what pride had broken. On the anniversary of the birthday dinner, I found the last voice memo on my phone. My younger voice said, "I want them to regret underestimating me." I understood her. She had needed that dream to survive, but regret alone was too small for the life I had built. Victor lost his company, his properties, and his public authority. Ethan lost his career, freedom, and stolen money. They paid a real price. Not because I invented suffering for them, but because I stopped standing between their choices and the consequences. I deleted the recording. That night I carried the same leather bag into a Northline board meeting. Inside were plans for 2 new employee-owned locations, no rescue agreement, no secret proof of my worth. I no longer needed a dramatic reveal to know who I was. My father had ordered an uneducated lowlife out of his house. The next morning he discovered that the daughter he discarded had been the only person prepared to save everything he valued. By the time he learned to respect me, I had learned something more important. Respect that must be purchased with silence is not respect. Family loyalty without accountability is only permission. And the most satisfying revenge is not destroying people who hurt you. It is refusing to destroy yourself to protect them. So tell me honestly, If you had been holding that rescue agreement at the dinner table, would you have opened the bag and saved them, or walked out and let the truth arrive the next morning?